the heart of this nation, under skies so blue,
there's a spirit that's stirring, values strong and true.
From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe.
Usually when we look at the aftermath of an earthquake, we focus entirely on the visible damage.
Yeah.
The cracked pavement, the collapsed bridges.
Right, the shattered windows, the obvious stuff.
Exactly. You point at the rubble and you just say, well, there it is. That's the disaster. Mm-hmm. And following the truly shocking attempted assassination targeting top Trump administration officials at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, the media is pretty much entirely focused on that immediate visceral damage.
Which makes sense. I mean, it's terrifying. But geologists aren't just looking at the rubble. They're looking deep underground at the tectonic plates that have been silently, relentlessly grinding against each other for decades, to create that exact moment of rupture.
Right.
They're studying the invisible pressure, because without understanding the pressure, you can never really understand why the ground finally had to give way.
And that tectonic pressure is exactly what we're mapping out today. Welcome to this deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a debate or, trying to catch up on the incredibly volatile state of American politics right now.
Or if you're just insanely curious about how a society functions under immense stress.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever brought you here, we are glad you're here. We are looking past the immediate rubble of this attack to unpack a specific article by Dimitri Bolt. And this piece, it really captures the intense, just boiling debate over political rhetoric, systemic frustration, and violence in America.
It really does. It's a piece that forces us to examine the actual machinery of public anger. It asks how things got to this point and, more importantly, where the release valves are.
Yeah. But before we jump into those fault lines, let's lay down the ground rules for you. Today's source material contains highly charged political content spanning both left-wing and right-wing perspectives.
Very highly charged.
Right. So to be absolutely clear, we are not taking sides or endorsing any of these viewpoints. Our mission is simply to impartially report on the ideas contained in the original source material and help you understand the core arguments being made by the various figures involved.
We're dissecting the mechanics of the arguments, exploring why they resonate with millions of people, rather than, declaring a winner.
Okay, let's unpack this and look at our central figure in the article today. Interestingly, it isn't one of the targets of the attack, nor is it the attacker.
No.
It is Democratic Representative Ro Khanna. Representative Khanna is facing intense national scrutiny right now because he is publicly defending the appeal of a highly controversial left-wing pundit named Hasan Piker.
Which, in the immediate aftermath of political violence, that's a position that instantly draws a massive amount of fire.
Oh, absolutely.
We're shifting from the broad terror of the White House Correspondents' Dinner attack directly into a very specific, heated controversy about who we listen to, why we listen to them, and what happens when their rhetoric crosses a line.
Yeah, so let's lay out the facts from the article so we know exactly what we're dealing with here. Hasan Piker is not some fringe voice shouting into the void.
Not at all.
He is a massive streaming pundit with millions of dedicated followers. But he is widely known for using inflammatory rhetoric. The article specifically calls out remarks where Piker defended the killing of the United Healthcare CEO and instances where he offered praise for Hamas.
And we should be clear, those are not just edgy internet takes.
Sure.
They are incredibly heavy, highly explosive statements that touch on actual, literal violence in the real world.
Exactly. And Representative Khanna went on the record to officially, unequivocally condemn that violence. He stated plainly that he condemns Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist organizations.
Right.
He also pointed out that he was among the first lawmakers to condemn the shooting of the United Healthcare executive. He's drawing a hard boundary, essentially telling the public that he does not support the destruction.
But he is attempting a very complex maneuver here, because while he condemns the violent rhetoric, he is simultaneously defending Piker's massive appeal to his audience.
It makes me think of a doctor trying to diagnose a patient. Like if a doctor says a severe hacking cough is a symptom of a terrible disease, the doctor isn't endorsing the disease.
Right. They aren't pro-cough.
Yeah, they aren't pro-cough. They are just pointing out that the cough is a diagnostic sign that something is fundamentally wrong in the body. Khanna seems to be arguing that Piker is the cough. He is a symptom of a deeper societal illness.
That diagnostic analogy gets right to the heart of Khanna's defense. He's trying to isolate the diagnostic value of the symptom from the sheer destructiveness of the illness itself.
But I have to push back on this a little bit, because in the reality of the digital age, is that separation actually possible?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. I mean, Khanna says he never approves of violence and condemns it whenever he hears it. But he still defends the appeal of a pundit who is actively praising violence. You can't just engage with a controversial pundit's audience without the algorithmic machinery kind of associating you with their extremism.
Yeah, the algorithms don't do nuance.
Exactly. It feels like trying to borrow a microphone from a radical shock jock, but pretending you aren't broadcasting on their frequency. So in a climate this volatile is trying to separate the quote-unquote appeal from the violent rhetoric, just a distinction without a difference.
What's fascinating here is that frequency analogy captures the absolute tightrope walk of the modern mainstream politician. I mean, think about the sheer numbers involved here.
It's huge.
It is. You have traditional elected officials looking at these massive, newly energized audiences flocking to radical digital pundits. We were talking about millions of young, highly engaged people.
Yeah.
A politician cannot simply ignore an audience of that size. In a democracy, that is a massive critical voting bloc. But engaging with them risks absorbing the taint of the pundit's most extreme rhetoric.
Because the audience isn't just listening to the pundit for policy ideas, right? They are engaging in a parasocial relationship where the radical rhetoric is actually part of the draw.
Precisely the point. The challenge Khanna is facing is the attempt to separate the message, like the underlying, completely valid grievance that the audience feels from the messenger, especially when that messenger crosses the line into supporting violence.
Why?
The article highlights how incredibly difficult and perhaps politically perilous that separation really is. It asks whether you can legitimize the audience's deep-seated anger without accidentally legitimizing the pundit's unacceptable violent solutions.
Okay, so if we establish that Khanna is trying to defend Piker's massive appeal without endorsing his rhetoric, the discussion naturally has to shift to the core mechanism here. Like, why does Khanna believe millions of people are tuning into this inflammatory rhetoric in the first place? What is actually driving them to that frequency?
Well, this is where we have to look closely at those tectonic plates we talked about earlier, the invisible pressure.
Yeah. According to the article, Khanna explains that Piker is tapping into a massive, deep-seated American anger. People are tuning in because they feel entirely locked out of the American dream. Khanna explicitly says people feel they can't buy a house, they can't afford gas, they don't have access to basic health care. They are, to use his exact phrasing, upset at the system.
And that word system is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. They aren't just upset at a specific politician or, a single policy. They are upset at the foundational structure of the economy.
Wait, if they are upset at the foundational structure, here's where it gets really interesting. This brings up a fascinating point from the article. Khanna, who is a progressive Democrat, doesn't just link this systemic frustration to Piker's far-left audience.
No, he goes much further.
He does. He points out that this exact same anti-system frustration is one of the primary reasons Donald Trump won the presidency twice.
Right.
If a progressive and a conservative populist are tapping into the exact same economic anger, it almost implies the traditional left-right political spectrum is completely obsolete right now. Are we looking at a circle instead of a straight line?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at the horseshoe theory in full effect.
Okay, break that down for me.
Sure. When we typically visualize politics, we imagine a straight horizontal line. The far left is on one end, the far right is on the other, and they're as far apart as physically possible.
Modal opposites.
Exactly. But the horseshoe theory suggests that if you bend that line, the extreme ends actually loop back and come very close to touching each other. What Khanna is pointing out is that both ends of the political spectrum are currently successfully tapping into the exact same foundational emotion.
The anger.
The anger. The profound, visceral feeling that the American quote-unquote system is fundamentally broken and actively rigged against the average citizen.
So the grievance of a left-wing listener who is furious about going bankrupt from medical debt actually perfectly aligns with the grievance of a populist conservative who feels their entire industry was hollowed out by bad trade deals.
Yes.
The pain point is identical. It's basically, the people in charge do not care if I survive.
The proposed solutions differ wildly, of course. The scapegoats differ wildly. The rhetoric differs wildly. But the tectonic pressure, the daily grinding inability to buy a house, afford gas, or get medical care, is the universal engine driving the extremes on both sides.
Wow.
Khanna is arguing that you cannot just stand at a podium and condemn the violent rhetoric. You have to actively engage with that universal economic pain, or else that pain will continue to fuel radicalization across the entire political spectrum.
Which makes me wonder if there's a darker mechanism at play here. Like if harnessing that tectonic anger guarantees a massive, highly energized, deeply loyal audience.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Right. Are some politicians and pundits actually incentivized to keep the system broken? If you actually fix the grievance, if everyone gets a house and healthcare, you lose the army.
That is the cynical but highly relevant underbelly of the outrage economy. When frustration becomes a political commodity, there is a very real danger that leaders will prioritize validating the anger over actually resolving the structural issues.
That makes total sense.
And that prolonged stagnation is exactly what pushes a citizen from being a frustrated voter to a radicalized viewer who starts cheering for systemic collapse.
So if both the far left and the populist right agree the system is completely broken, the immediate question becomes, how are you legitimately allowed to fix it?
Right.
And that's exactly where the author of the town hall article, Dimitri Bolt, draws a hard line. He presents a very forceful conservative rebuttal.
Bolt is essentially outlining the boundaries of the social contract here.
Yeah, he argues that murder, theft, and illegal acts are absolutely not the ways in which real Americans choose to effect change in their country. Instead, the author points directly to the legacy of the American Revolution. He writes that we effect change the way we learned after the American Revolution, through voting and through persuading and changing the minds of our fellow Americans.
Right.
Mainstreaming individuals who support or excuse violence on either the left or the right is reprehensible to him.
He views it as a deliberate attempt to sow chaos and exploit it for political gain.
His ultimate conclusion is that now is the time to double down on the American system of governance, not to abandon it in pursuit of revolutionary change. He warns that pursuing revolutionary change wouldn't lead to positive reform, but rather to a total erosion of the American way of life.
Which is a very strong warning.
It is. So what does this all mean? Let's unpack a glaring historical paradox in this argument. Bolt explicitly uses the American Revolution as his foundation for why Americans must only use peaceful voting and persuasion today.
Yes.
But the American Revolution was a literal, armed, bloody conflict. I mean, they didn't vote King George out of power. They shot his soldiers.
They absolutely did.
So how does Bolt square the romanticization of our violent revolutionary origins with a strict demand for absolute, peaceful, systemic order today?
This raises an important question, and that paradox requires us to look at the actual mechanics of how a republic is formed and maintained. Notice that Bolt uses a very deliberate phrase. He says we effect change the way we learned after the American Revolution.
After. That's the key word, carrying the weight of his argument.
It really is. The underlying premise here is the concept of the state's monopoly on violence. A revolution is a chaotic, destructive resetting of the board. It is the raw state of nature.
Okay.
But once that board is set, once a democratic system of law, order, and representation is actually established and agreed upon, the citizens agree to surrender their right to use violence to solve their grievances.
Right.
That is the social contract. Once you have a ballot box, resorting to violence is no longer a valid tool for change. It becomes poison to the system.
Because if you use violence to solve a problem in a democracy, you're essentially bypassing the consent of your fellow citizens.
Yeah.
You are saying the democracy itself doesn't work, and whoever has the most force gets to make the rules.
And that is exactly what Bolt is warning against. The moment the approach of voting and persuasion begins to falter, we risk watching our entire system of law and order fade. It goes from being a strict binding requirement to becoming a mere suggestion. If every single group that feels economically frustrated or politically marginalized decides that violence is justified because they feel the system is broken, then you don't have a system anymore. You just have different armed factions fighting in the streets to impose their will.
It's kind of like saying, yes, your house is freezing and the heating system is broken and you have every right to be furious about it. But setting the living room on fire is not the solution. You won't get warm. You will just burn the entire house down with everyone inside.
That beautifully illustrates the conservative rebuttal. You must fix the heater, using the tools provided by the system, the wrenches and screwdrivers of voting, legislation, and persuasion.
Right.
You cannot burn down the structure itself.
Right.
Bolt is drawing a hard line that no matter how valid your frustration is, no matter how impossible it feels to afford a house or health care, abandoning the established system of governance for revolutionary chaos leads only to erosion, not reform. Mainstreaming anyone who excuses that violence, even if a politician claims they are just engaging with their audience's frustration, actively normalizes the destruction of the republic.
Zooming out and connecting this directly back to you, the listener. Why does this specific debate over a progressive representative, a radical pundit, and a conservative article actually matter to your daily life?
Good question.
Whether you are prepping for a tense political discussion with a family member, or you're just trying to mentally process the incredibly volatile climate we're living in right now, this single article perfectly encapsulates the defining challenge of modern democracy.
It really serves as a perfect microcosm of the macro crisis we are all watching unfold.
It shows us the incredibly precarious tightrope we are walking as a society. How does a nation handle widespread, entirely legitimate economic frustration, like the inability of millions to afford basic survival needs, before that frustration boils over into outright political violence? On one hand, you have the progressive argument laid out by Khanna. You must engage with the anger of the marginalized, even when it's messy and uncomfortable, because ignoring their very real economic pain breeds further radicalization.
Right.
On the other hand, you have the conservative argument from Bolt. You must rigidly, uncompromisingly uphold the rule of law and condemn anyone who skirts the line of violence, because tolerating revolutionary rhetoric will literally destroy the foundation of the country.
Both sides clearly recognize that the tectonic pressure is building to a critical level. The fault lines are groaning. They just violently disagree on how, or even if, we can safely release the valve.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We've looked at the symptoms, we've explored the diagnosis of systemic failure, and we've examined the radically different prescribed treatments. But I want to leave you with a lingering question that builds on the mechanics of everything we've just discussed.
Bolt argues forcefully that voting and persuasion are the only valid American tools for change. But if millions of frustrated citizens stretching across both the left and the right are looking at their lives and feeling that those traditional tools are fundamentally disconnected from their reality.
Right then.
If voting doesn't seem to lower the cost of housing or secure health care or make groceries affordable, what new nonviolent mechanisms might need to evolve to bridge that gap?
Because if the traditional levers of democracy feel completely detached from the actual machinery of people's survival, how long can a society ask its citizens to keep patiently pulling those levers before the entire system of law and order fades away entirely? If the plates keep grinding and the pressure keeps building and the surface level release valves are rusted shut, well, eventually the ground has to give. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the systems around you. Keep looking past the rubble to understand the pressure beneath, and we will catch you next time.
You Democrats, bleed with a cracks like a New York sewer rat. Go away, don't come back. Go away, don't come back. Caffeine's policies destructive. Deep dive podcast show. Let's dive in. On the heart of this nation, under skies so blue, there's a spirit that's stirring values strong and true. From the mountains to the prairies, from the cities to the sea, we stand for liberty, for faith and family. We're diving deep into the heart of what we believe. Conservatives have views in our souls, they're interweaved. With courage and with honor, we'll hold our ground. For freedom, for tradition, in this land we found. We cherish our Constitution, the words that set us free, the right to bear arms. the free.